So whereas before we would have to provide oversight and financial reports, now accountants have to provide insights. The role of the accountant of the future as not just being a custodian or guardian of the numbers.
So there's predictive AI, there's generative AI, there's AI agents. They all influence how accountants work. So the tools are helping us make those decisions or suggest what those decisions could be much faster.
You need to have your accountant not just to report the numbers. You need somebody who can get involved in the business. So the goalkeeper is the accountant in an organization.
Technology may replace tasks, but it will never replace trust.
Because AI is probabilistic. It is not an exact science. It is guessing. It's just very good at guessing.
Accountants need to adapt technology very soon.
We need to be able to understand how these tools work.
Can you just elaborate a little bit more in terms of how accountants can become change leaders in terms of their skill or the mindset change that is required?
You have to start with the outcome you need and you work your way backwards.
Do not be in a shell. Use that to enhance your personal image as well.
Welcome to another episode of Asia Plus TV. Today we are going to talk about accounting, the future of accounting, and the paradigm shift that accountants need to deal with in today's modern context. I have with me three fantastic professionals who are representing CPA Australia today to talk about this context under the topic, the modern accountant, an advisor, an analyst, and change leader. First with me is Professor Dale Pinto, the President and Chair of Board of CPA Australia. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
And then I have Kaushika Jayalath, Board Director of CPA Australia. And Mr. Dinu Kettiarachchi, the Sri Lankan Liaison Representative for CPA Australia and the Chairman of RNH Ventures. I want all of you all. So I'll start with Professor Dale. From your perspective and years of experience of leading as a finance professional, how do you see the role of accountant evolving from technical compliance to strategic leadership?
Yeah, great question. Thank you for that. And certainly the profession is undergoing a fundamental transformation. So colloquially, of course, accountants have been called many things in the past, including bean counters and scorekeepers. And really emphasizing that is three things: accuracy, compliance, and stewardship. Now that still is there, but now we are being required more to be strategic advisors or business partners. So whereas before we would have to provide oversight and financial reports, now accountants have to provide insights. In other words, telling the stories behind the numbers. What do the figures actually mean? It might be to a board, or it might be to an employer, it might be to an investor. And more than that, they're also being asked to provide foresight, what might happen into the future. So when you think of the traditional skills the accountants had, that's fundamentally shifted. And for markets like Sri Lanka, it's really important, this shift, because you're going through recovery. You've got investment considerations to attract investment into the jurisdiction. You want to improve the productivity of the nation. And of course, you want stronger governance. And that's what the modern accountant brings to the table, because we increase transparency, we help with resource allocation, and we provide evidence-based decision making on the basis of verifiable information, which is really, really important. So I'd summarize the role of the accountant of the future as not just being a custodian or guardian of the numbers, but a trusted advisor, a strategic navigator, and a driver of sustainable value.
Thank you. Kaushik, I move to you. In your work driving finance transformation through cloud technology, what are the digital tools that are shaping decision-making today in the industry?
I think there's different aspects of AI that's come into play, and there's no one type of AI. If you ask any two people, any three people, their definition of AI, you're going to get a different answer. So there's predictive AI, there's generative AI, there's AI agents. They all influence how accountants work. But the fundamental task or the fundamental objective of an accountant, the purpose of an accountant has not changed, because the accountant exists to provide factual information in a way that a business can make decisions on. Now, the goalpost has slowly shifted because now we also need to provide that decision as well. We need to advise on what those decisions could be. So the tools are helping us make those decisions or suggest what those decisions could be much faster. So you use AI as a tool. AI is the best example I can give you, but you use AI as a tool to create value for the business. And so adding on to what Dale said, we are now in a position as accountants not just to be the custodians of financial data, but now we can be custodians of enterprise data. And what that means is looking at sustainability data, looking at payroll information, looking at HR information, and trying to collate all of that together to say, here's the impact to the bottom line if you do X. Here's the impact to the bottom line if you do Y. Being able to make that suggestion, being able to provide that that advice to your senior leadership, that is the value that an accountant brings now. And that all is possible because of the agility we get with the technology we have today.
Dinuk, over to you. In your experience of leading diversified business interests and corporates, it's truly valuable what the accountants play when it comes to value addition to owners and boards. What do you think is the primary role of accountant in terms of creating this value?
Yeah, so today I wear a different hat. I'm representing someone who sits on the other side of the table and who hires accountants and who has been working with accountants for close to 2 decades. And for sure, I mean, you need to have your accountant not just to report the numbers. You need somebody who can get involved in the business. Um, Let me give you now, since we are in this football season, just finished the World Cup final. I always have a little story to the young accountants whenever I have a session with them. Football is a game with 11 players with one goalkeeper in that 11. You have 10 guys playing in the front, but one goalkeeper. And if that goalkeeper is weak, the entire team will lose. So the goalkeeper is the accountant in an organization. So that, and the goalkeeper has to be multifaceted. Traditionally, we expect them to be ethical, and we expect them to be trustworthy. That is very important for as a business leader. We should be able to trust what we see on the and in the reports, and based our decisions based on those. So I will always look at the accountant to be someone who can participate in the conversation and add value to the decision making process. So yes, accountants they need to change their role from what it was, like Dale correctly said. But we truly need a good accountant in an organization to make that organization great.
Professor Pinto, over to you. What do you see as the biggest challenge facing the profession, especially when it comes to maintaining public trust in this ever-changing dynamic world where you need to adapt?
It's a great question, and this is at the heart of what defines accounting as a profession. We are trusted advisors. We need to act with ethics and professional integrity. So if you look at CPA Australia's crest, its coat of arms, there's one word, and that is integrity. So if we lose that confidence, then the public will not come to us. The governments won't come to us. Employers won't come to us, and we lose the faith. Now, the question you've posed is really interesting when we look at, say, technological advances, because it really reveals the tension. So there is a tension between trying to balance innovation. So you want people to be creative and innovative and take risks and do things to advance society, but you need guardrails, you need responsibility. So that's the counterbalance in this equation. And there's a really nice saying I came across recently, which went like this: it's technology may replace tasks, but it will never replace trust. may replace tasks, but will never replace trust. And our focus, certainly as a professional accounting organization, is how can we instill the responsible use of AI to make sure we maintain this trust. So to give you the practical manifestation of that, what does that actually mean? One of the things we are trained in is called professional skepticism, where we don't just accept things. Now, I'm relating this to AI because when you get an output from AI, it looks good and you think, oh, it must be right. But as an accountant, it's our job to ask the hard questions. Is the data reliable? Is the model being transparent? Is there a bias that could be here in the answer that I should be interrogating further? Who is accountable if that automated system produces the wrong outcome? Because ultimately, there's no law to my knowledge that allows the machine to sign off on anything. A human still has to do it. So in the old days, I'd use my calculator. Oh, even before then, I'd use my head. Then I use a calculator. Then I use Excel, and now I can use AI. But they're all tools, and ultimately, I'm accountable as the signing officer. So I need to make sure that the information is verifiable and correct. So my summary to this one would be, again, technology is really good at processing information, but it's people who are going to provide the context, the judgment, and the ethical leadership that my colleague talked about earlier. And that's really at the heart of it. And paradoxically, I think in an AI world, these human skills are going to become even more important. And that's where the role of the accountant really comes to the fore.
Kaushika, we talked about technology, and in today's technology-led environment, what are some of the practical steps that accountants can take to move away from reporting specialists to very strong advisors?
I think there's two sides to this. One is a mindset shift, and the other is the skills shift. The mindset shift is largely around how you think about how you add value. Accountants tend to think that we add value by interpreting the general ledger, but you have to change that mindset to now start to think about customers, operations, your workforce, strategic priorities. So then you start thinking about how the organization creates value. That then fundamentally changes how you think about KPIs, how you think about what you measure, how you think about what you report on. And then it influences what decisions you add value to. So once you have the mindset right to be someone who advises on value, then you look at the skills. And that is where you need to understand, the different AI tools. You need to understand the different capabilities of those AI tools, and you need to understand how to use them. Things like prompt engineering, things like context engineering. What guardrails do you set to your AI? What context do you set to your AI? Are you sure your AI tool only knows your company's data? Does it know anyone else's data? And then you think about judgment engineering. The thing that Dale spoke about before in the context of a skill would be knowing when to trust the AI and knowing when not to trust the AI. Because AI is probabilistic. It is not an exact science. It is guessing. It's just very good at guessing. So at that point, you need to know where you draw the line. Now, these are all skills that you can learn. And then you need to pair that with really good communication skills. Once you have that matched up, you are an accountant that can add a lot more value than, say, an accountant who might know the accounting standards and the business inside out, but doesn't know how to interpret that at scale, or doesn't know how to translate that with an efficiency you can bring with these new technologies in play.
In today's context, enterprise growth, governance, business resilience are critical factors. What do you think the role of Sri Lankan accountants and accountants in the wider region needs to do to strengthen its role and the value that they are creating with relevance to those three aspects?
Yeah, so as we all know, Sri Lanka went through a really, really challenging time in the recent past. And that itself showed what the role of accountants, how it has changed, especially in a local context. Our accountants had to be forcefully move into scenario planning, basically cash flow management, get involved in the decision making. So it was a forced entry for some of the accounting, especially in the SME sector accountants. they had to get into these kind of areas. So I think basically the accountants need to build trust, like what I was telling earlier. Once you build trust in the entire ecosystem, the trust is prevailing, you attract investment. Investors would go behind. When you see the system is robust, you'll get investment. And because Sri Lanka is now looking for investment, and there is a role for accountants to play, because that's where the investors will look at how solid is the company, how solid is the economy. So from a national level, as against in the private sector, we need to build that trust. So once the investors start coming in, that will create jobs, and that is what the growth we are all looking for. So I think accountants need to adapt technology very soon, especially AI. There are a lot of AI tools that can complement what the accountants can do. A lot of people talk about, AI will replace the accountant and there will no longer be. I'm a firm believer that AI will automate the task, but never the professional. So there is a role for the young accountants to change. And basically systems has to be looked into by the finance professionals. See, just because you put technology, your systems won't improve. Systems are, you have good systems in a company and you put technology on top of it, your company becomes excellent. It's not the other way around. I think there are a lot of things which our accountants can do. And historically, Sri Lankans have been exporting a lot of accountants globally. So especially in the region, we have a huge pool of accountants in the Middle East, in Australia, in US, in Europe, and all that. So there is considerable scope for our profession in the region, but very especially for the recovery of the Sri Lankan economy. We have a role to play.
Professor Pinto, just like any other profession, accountants also need to be relevant, especially in this global context today. As a person who is deeply involved in education, governance, taxation, what are some of the skills that you feel accountants needs to be prioritizing in order to be relevant and world-class?
Yeah, great question, and really building on the comments of both of my colleagues, I think I'd put it into three main buckets. So the first bucket is financial and technical skills. Now, this is something we've always had. So accounting, auditing, tax, governance, assurance, risk management frameworks. That'll continue. So this will be the foundation of what we do, and that won't change. But we need more than that now. We need more than that. So the second bucket I'd add would be digital and AI literacy. And by that, I mean, we don't have to suddenly become software engineers and coding experts, but I really liked what Kaushika said earlier. We need to be able to understand how these tools work, not only what they can do, but what the limitations of them are. We need to understand how do we use them effectively? What are the barriers and limitations to them? And thirdly, and this is a real trap for new players, me included when I first use it, is you need to supervise the output because it looks very convincing. And this is where this professional skepticism that I talked about earlier is critical, because that's a skill that accountants have. In tax, I'm a tax person, we call it the smell test. And you look at something and it looks shiny, but you know something's wrong. You've got to then inquire more, ask more questions, and challenge the information that's put before you. So that's really the technological skills. And the third one, and I've talked about this in my earlier answer, is the human skills, the critical thinking, the communication, the ethical judgment, collaborating with others, and influencing and providing insights. Storytelling is going to become very important. And these are human skills. So we have to translate data and numbers, which is available to us readily now, into what does that mean? How can I grow my business? How can I attract investment? What are the risks if I take this particular course of action? So it's a very different conversation than what accountants might have had in the past. And underneath all of that is that's what we need now. This will change. So I think we need this lifelong learning mindset. We need to be adaptive. So we need to embrace change. We need to adapt to change, and we need to evolve as a result of it to keep up with the current requirements.
Thank you. Kaushika, we talked about mindset shift in your previous response. And as a person who has worked in a number of areas like finance, project management, innovation and transformation, can you just elaborate a little bit more in terms of how accountants can become change leaders in terms of their skill or the mindset change that is required?
That's a very good question, and it's probably one of the hardest areas to kind of tackle just for accountants who are looking to evolve with the profession, right? In my opinion, change management or change leadership requires a change in thinking for yourself and then applying that thinking to every single problem you face, but also be willing to grow with it. And the best example I can give you is I work for a large scale technology corporation that's a multinational, and I get pulled into a lot of AI labs. So enterprise businesses with more than 500 staff set up a workshop for the day, bring us in and ask, and basically say, we want AI. And I stop them right there and go, what are you trying to solve? What is the actual outcome you're trying to achieve? And then let's work backwards to figure out what is the tool that you need. So AI is the best example in the context of just because you think it gives you efficiency, it doesn't mean it will. You have to start with the outcome you need and you work your way backwards. That is a values-based conversation. Now, as a finance professional, I understand what the outcomes a finance department is going to look for. And so it could be cost optimization, it could be revenue generation, it could be looking at blue skies, thinking around new revenue opportunities, whatever that is the problem you want to solve with AI. So that changes the mindset that an accountant needs to have, because now it's the accountant that needs to put the numbers together to make this work. So you are no longer just looking at return on investment from one investment. You're looking at going live with a new AI tool and seeing how it's going to create revenue for you over time, or how it's going to optimize your costs over time. So that changes fundamentally how you think about KPIs and metrics as well. And you need to still be willing to pivot and change, because you might start something not understanding what the AI tool can do for you. And then you need to be willing to either pivot, change, kill it, scale it up. All of that requires financial data to back it, to back the decision. And you as the accountant then provide that advice. So in that regard, I think the values-based conversation that an accountant starts adds the most value. And while there are risks with AI to the workforce, I think this is where there's a real opportunity for accountants as well, because no one's really hitting that gap right now. IT professionals can't speak for the financial figures. Financial staff who don't understand AI can't bridge that gap with IT. So if you upskill yourself and if you change your mentality with a continuous growth mindset to learn new AI tools, subscribe to a newsletter, learn what's coming up, and you apply that within your business, then you naturally become a change leader, at which point you are setting the benchmark for everyone else to follow. And as long as you make sure your entire team moves along with you, you are proving that you are a change leader. And you stop being an accountant and you become a business leader with finance expertise. And that is really where I see accountants adding value, especially in transformations.
Fantastic point, Kaushika, and I'll probably end up with you, Dinuk. The purpose is quite clear, moving away from simply managing numbers to driving real transformation in industry and in businesses. In your experience of having dealt with a number of companies, yours as well as your clients, what are some of the qualities that distinguish an accountant who has the capability to drive meaningful change?
Very tricky question. So sometimes, first and foremost, let's face it. The World Economic Forum, they have put out a future jobs report, and it says 40% of the skilled workforce is going to go through a transformation of their skills. So accountants are not going to be immune to it. So yes, first and foremost, that is there. Um, how do I identify accountant who is different from? So you have two types of accountant. The one accountant we have been discussing it, who reports on the past, and there's the other type of accountant who will get involved in the decision making process. So um, you need to look at a few soft skills apart from your technical knowledge. So technical knowledge, we expect them to have it when you have the qualification. But we look at for things like curiosity, um, creativity, good communication skills, showing leadership ability. So those are things which we need. I personally myself, where when I sit down to look at recruiting accountants, both in practice and in business, those are the elements I think are key in our decision making, because you will see so many having the same type of qualifications and same level. So what is the, how would you cut yourself above the rest? My little advice to the young up and coming accountants, um, do not be in a shell. Do not think about only the studies. In fact, I have a program with our firm. Every Friday, I sit down with five trainees and have a cup of tea and coffee with them and have a chit chat. And only thing what I tell them is, going to lectures, doing your exams is important, yes, but don't sacrifice your networking, being part of your student societies, being part of organizing your various student activities, because that will help you be a rounded personality. And we as employers, that's what we are looking for. So, and they use a lot of technology, AI. They're on TikTok and all these social media. The Gen Zs are, this is what their main activity is. But use that to enhance your personal image as well, and your skill set. And there's a lot of things you can do with AI and all these tools you have. We didn't have that luxury when we were young at the time. And now it's information on your fingertips. You can be well-rounded. You will have so much of information. You need to know what's happening in the world, because now we are, as even if you're in a company and you're advising things, because some of these companies are having global presence, they're diversified, they have global operations. So you need to understand the economic aspects of those countries and all. So you have to be well rounded. So these are the areas which I would look for, and I would advise young budding accountants to look at beyond the means of just studying, going for lectures, doing an exam, getting the qualification.
Thank you. At Asia Plus TV, we always bring about topics which are modern, relevant, and future driven. So it was an absolute pleasure today to talk about the role of accountants, the modern accountant as an advisor, as an analyst, and a change leader. And it was a pleasure to have three professionals representing CPA Australia, a 140-year-old institution, driving the industry, driving the profession, and the thought leader in the profession as well. Thank you very much, Professor Pinto, Kaushik Jalat, and Dinu Kettiarachchi for joining today's program at Asia Plus TV. Bye-bye.